My name is Madison Clarke. I'm 34 years old. 3 PhDs, worthless printouts. That's what my father said loud enough for the whole auditorium to hear, just as my name was called during the national ceremony honoring strategic defense advisors. No one laughed with him, but no one spoke up for me either. I stood there in full uniform eyes, forward, lips still. The screen behind me still glowed with the words, Meritorious Civilian Service. But every letter felt like it was being stripped away by the weight of his voice. He continued clear and steady. You can collect Ivy League diplomas all you want, but theory doesn't save anyone on the battlefield. I scanned the rows of faces. My mother looked down. My brother smirked. Then something shifted. A general seated 2 rows back removed his cover, slowly shielding half his face. He stood up without a word, stepped into the aisle, pulled out his phone, and made a call. The air froze. Moments later, military police entered through the main door. My father stopped laughing. No one said another word. I stood there in the grand hall commemorating 25 years of national service, and no one knew what they were missing. They didn't know, but they would. This wasn't the first time I'd been dismissed, but it might be the last. Walk with me, see who I became. And what happened to the man who once mocked me? No one moved. Not the general, not the MPs by the door. Not even my father, who was still frozen mid-scoff, his lips parted slightly as if the rest of his sentence had gotten lost in the air. The weight of silence wasn't new to me, but this silence was different. It had direction. It pressed down like a question no one dared to answer. I didn't shift my stance. My hands remained lightly clasped behind my back, military posture civilian setting. My eyes focused straight ahead on the curtain behind the stage, even though I could feel every eye drifting toward me. They didn't know what had just shifted, but they felt it. The general sat back down without putting his cover on. He held it in his lap like it meant something. The MPs didn't speak, didn't point, just stood in position stone-faced. And my father, ever the man who filled quiet with bluster, suddenly had nothing to say. A cough sounded from the left wing of the hall. Someone adjusted their chair. Still no words. Behind the podium, the announcer, a junior officer in a pressed blue uniform, glanced down at the paper in his hand and hesitated before continuing. He didn't look up. He just said my name again, this time more carefully. Madison Clarke. For distinguished contributions to national defense strategy. I stepped forward. My heels touched the stage wood with a soft, hollow knock that echoed across the room. I didn't walk quickly, didn't smile. I just moved forward like I always had, quietly, intentionally, and without explanation. The certificate was still there on the podium. No one handed it to me. No photos, no applause. Just that same frozen hush, suspended like breath, waiting to be released. I took the certificate, nodded once, then turned to step down. I passed my father on the 3rd row. He didn't meet my eyes. I didn't offer him the chance. My brother looked back and forth between the general and the MPs, trying to read something in their faces. He wouldn't find it. I returned to my seat in the back row. The seat no one had saved for me, the one I had pulled from the corner and placed quietly as always. I sat. The certificate rested on my lap, unread. The ink was probably still drying. Around me, the ceremony resumed, but the tempo had changed. People readjusted their postures. Whispers started soft, incomplete. I looked down at the floor, letting the hum fill the space around me. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was movement. And movement meant something was coming. I've lived in rooms like this before where silence is mistaken for weakness and noise is confused with power, but I've also seen what happens when the right kind of silence is held long enough. It doesn't need to shout. It shifts the ground. I was raised on volume. Orders barked. Heels slammed. Doors never quite shut gently. Our home wasn't just a house. It was a converted barracks from a base no longer in use, concrete walls, narrow hallways, and my father's medals hanging where family portraits might have gone. There were rules, there were ranks, and there was always something to prove. My father, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Clarke, U.S. Army retired, built his life on commands and consequences. The military didn't shape him, It simply gave him a name for the man he already was. My mother adapted. I survived. I learned young that my value was determined by how little trouble I caused. I was the quiet child. Not because I lacked things to say, but because I understood that saying them wouldn't change anything. My brother Jason learned the opposite. He raised his voice, raised his fist, and was raised high on our father's shoulders for doing it. By the time I was 10, I could recite every NATO member state alphabetically, but I still wasn't allowed to speak at the dinner table unless spoken to. Jason failed algebra twice and got a celebratory steak dinner for passing on his third try. I was scolded for bringing home a B+ in physics. It wasn't that my father thought I was unintelligent, it's that he thought intelligence mine was ornamental, something pretty to hang on a wall but useless in the field. To him, soldiers saved the world. People like me just watched it happen. When I graduated high school early, I applied to 3 top-tier universities. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't say anything at all. Instead, he told me that if I wanted to waste my time playing scholar, I could do it on my own dime. I worked 3 part-time jobs and ate leftover rice for weeks at a time. I didn't call home. I didn't expect him to notice. He did, but not in the way I hoped. At the end of my first year, I sent him a short note, just 2 lines: "I'm safe. I'm working hard." I got into the Defense Studies program. He mailed me back an empty envelope. No note inside. Just one of his used paper range targets folded twice. Message received. By the time I earned my first PhD, he called it a decorative piece for the bathroom. When I earned my second, he said I was just avoiding real life. The third, he didn't say anything. He just laughed when he heard. A long, hollow laugh that didn't stop even when no one was laughing with him. He didn't know what I was building, didn't care. And maybe that hurt less than knowing he did care, just not in a way I could ever reach. It wasn't that I needed his approval. It's that I grew up in a world where withholding approval was currency, and I was broke. Still, I kept going, because while Jason was deploying to visible wars, I was studying the invisible ones: mental health collapse among deployed units, cognitive fatigue in drone operators, the psychological impact of asymmetrical warfare. I wasn't dodging bullets, but I was tracking the ones no one saw coming. My work never made headlines, but it made a difference. At least that's what I told myself. Until one mission unraveled and they decided someone needed to pay for it. And guess whose name was easiest to erase? The mission wasn't supposed to make headlines. It wasn't even supposed to exist. Officially, it was a field training exercise in the Northern Isles. Unofficially, it was a psychological stabilization test run an early implementation of a protocol I'd spent 3 years developing, aimed at assessing group cohesion under duress during joint NATO operations. I'd written every word of that framework, pored over patterns of cognitive decay, communication breakdown, and cultural misalignment that often turned good soldiers into fragmented units. My solution wasn't glamorous, it was clinical. But it worked. At least it had. Until one unit failed. They fractured under pressure. A mock hostage scenario went sideways, and when the command review board came looking for answers, they didn't ask who designed the simulation. They asked who approved it. That would be me. And in a matter of 48 hours, the entire body of my work was called into question. Emails vanished. Support staff I had worked alongside were suddenly unreachable. My name was quietly removed from the research repository.